Welcome to Tomi'sGameTable. My name's Tommy. There's heaps of videos out there on YouTube, so I'd just like to thank you for clicking on this one. And in today's episode, we're going to be building some rocks. Alright, now for today's build, we're going to be working on making some freehand rocks. This is a really fun and easy project. Again, if you're just getting into this hobby and you just want to get a little bit used to using all these tools, this is a perfect place to start. So, these are the kind of rocks we're going to be making. And to make something like that, we're going to need a random piece of cut off foam. I literally found this at the dump when I was doing a dump run, getting rid of some yard trimmings, and I was like, hey, there's a good piece of foam. So always keep your eye out for good foam. We're going to use our handheld cutter again. This thing is invaluable. If you haven't bought one yet after watching my first video, why haven't you? Go and get one. They're only like 25 bucks, super cheap. Some super simple paints again, black, grey, and white. And we might use a little bit of brown again. We're just gonna have to see how we go with that one. You'll also need your Mod Podge mix of black paint and Mod Podge, or whatever undercoat paint you'd like to use. Using Tupperware container again for my paint. Cup and some brushes, just cheap ones, keeping it simple. And a few screws. This will make a little bit more sense when we get into it. Alright, and if you want to stick around till the end of the video, we're actually going to be having a little bit of an extra tip as well. Let's get into the build. Alright, now, starting first things off, we're going to use our trusty little hot wire cutter again. So we're going to swap over to an attachment that we haven't really used yet. We're going to use this one. It's kind of similar to what's on the Proxime table, just like a nice thin wire. This one's probably the one I'd use, I reckon, most out of all the handheld ones. Alright, I'm going to grab that piece of scrap foam. I'm just looking for a decent chunk. I reckon like this corner piece right here. Looks perfect. I'm just going to come through. Just try and cut a decent chunk off this piece of styrofoam. There you have it. Chunk of styrofoam. I reckon let's make two while we're going, eh? How satisfying is that? Oh my god. One little handy tip to always keep in mind when you're building stuff to this 28mm scale is just keep a little mini on you. And that'll give you an idea of how big these boulders are going to be. We want to try and keep a nice flat spot on these bits of styrofoam because it's always good to just have a nice handy base. Now, this is one of the funnest parts of this hobby. I'm not even going to go in there with too much of a design idea. I'm just going to jump straight in and start carving this thing free-handed. We're going to try and get rid of a lot of this circular sort of crappy stuff, because once you hit it with this edge, it actually seals it and makes it a bit harder as well and gets rid of that sort of styrofoamy look. So, not going too out of control. I might start around the edges. You can see I'm kind of purposely rocking this thing around and trying to make it not too perfect. We're trying to make some really nice organic shapes. Again, rocks are never usually too perfect. Boom! That looks sick, just straight up like that. And you can see I'm just going to start chipping away at this bad boy now. Because again, we just don't want any of this to look too perfect. There's also a very fine line, in my opinion, to a rock and like a glacial sort of ice spire. So try to keep that in mind too. Now, sort of same as what we've done with the top. We just want to come through and just sort of chip away at this now, just to give it a little bit of life. I try not to think about it too much. Just go in there and start chopping away at pieces. And this will just give it more detail. And I'm just looking for any spots that I can see that exposed. Basically that's what I'm looking for around the sides. But you know what? I think that's looking sick. And see how quick that was? Really doesn't take long at all to get a really nice, cool looking boulder. Yep, I love that. Cool. So that's our first little boulder done. We're going to move on to this one now. And I think I've decided I'm going to make this one a little bit lower and wider. So we've got a couple of different sort of styles. So, same thing, just get in there and start chopping away. You can see I go with a little bit of a process. I go around the edges most of the time first, not always. I try and get the general sort of idea and the shape of what I'm going for. Sick. And man, honestly, that's already looking really cool. I might try and flatten it off a little tiny bit, but I like the idea of being able to use all this stuff quite modularly, so if I can still put a guy up there, sick, that's what I'm after. Now again, you can do this also with a knife, hobby knife. You can see in my first build episode the reasons why I don't like to use a hobby knife. I'm just not very good at them. There's people out there who can get cleaner cuts, nicer lines than I can with it. Give it a bit of detail, but make sure we can still sit a mini up on there. I think that's going to start looking really cool. Now you can even do this with your dungeon tiles if you want to make it like a little bit more detail and stuff like that. I've purposely kept that first video extremely simple just because we don't want to overwhelm anybody, especially if you're new to this hobby and you're just getting into it for the first time. Alright, so that's our 2 boulders, our 2 rocks. Kept it all pretty simple, nothing too wild, but I reckon they look pretty cool. We'll definitely be able to do some cool days. Now, this is where this part comes in. Random screws. So one thing I forgot to mention, you might need one of these. You're literally screwing into styrofoam, so it's pretty soft. But what we're trying to do is just create a little bit of weight. Sometimes when you're working with styrofoam, it's a little bit annoying if, just say, you've got a window open and a breeze comes through and starts blowing everything around. It's also, you know, can fall over a little bit easier when you've got people with drinks and stuff reaching across tables. So we just want to add a little bit of sort of weight to the bottom of it, and it'll make it feel nice and tactile, and it'll also be more practical. It won't blow over as easily and stuff. So just be mindful where you're pushing these screws in. I think with this sort of size, we might go about 4, just to keep a decent amount of weight. So I usually just start off hand screwing them in. And you just don't want these to stick out the side. Just use common sense where you're screwing them in. See, I'm not really measuring anything out. I'm just making sure that they're not going to poke through the sides. So again, just double check that's not going to stick out anyway. If I screw it in, happy days. Now we're just going to screw these bad boys in. And you can go just a little bit lower than the actual sort of base there. That way it's not going to sort of get caught on anything if it's sliding around the table and all that kind of stuff. Feels way heavier. It's just got that little bit of tactile. It's not going to blow over as easy. Lovely. Going to move on to this one, do the same thing. Also, just make sure your depth's good. We're pretty good. I've got a bunch of different length screws. But yeah, just something to always be mindful of whenever you're screwing into anything, not just styrofoam. Some people even like to use a little bit of hot glue on the bottom of their sort of scatter terrain. It just makes it a little bit grippier. So far, I haven't found like it's something that I need to do for my builds. I haven't had them sliding around the table too much. But if I do find that starts to happen, it's always nice to know those little tips. So that's how they should look on the bottom. See how they're deeper than the actual base. So when they're sitting down, it ain't gonna catch on anything. But they feel so much better, way more tactile. All right, so that's pretty much the basis of our entire rocks. You should, hopefully, still have a bit of this Mod Podge mix left over from last time. So grab that out. This time I'm actually wearing my apron because I was pretty naughty last time and I didn't wear an apron and I got paint on my shirt. I also painted on my cutting mat, which is something I don't usually do. But you can see I'm trying to put in more and more effort into these videos every single time, so I get a bit forgetful. Keeping it real simple, guys. Mod Podge and black paint. Slap it on there. The only thing you need to be mindful of when you're painting these rocks is just make sure you get it in between all those cracks. So sometimes it's good to look at it from all angles. Same thing as with the dungeon tiles. Sometimes I like to just go around the edges of underneath, just in case you have something elevated and you don't want to see that white styrofoam poking through. Beautiful. That's our first one, undercoated. Done. Moving on to the next one. Cool, and there you have it. That's our second one, undercoated. Super easy. Alright, so now that we've got that undercoat nice and dry with our Mod Podge and black mix, we're going to come through with a little bit of grey paint. This time I might actually use a little bit of the Vallejo, just because it's a really nice paint. You can also still use your cheap stuff, it also works really good. But I just really like the tone of grey on this one, just for rocks specifically. It looks really nice. We're just going to start dry brushing this bad boy. You see how effective that is just straight away. You could almost just do one coat of this grey. It's sort of dry brush, and it'll look amazing. But of course we're going to go a little bit further than that. We want to make this thing really pop. And make sure you stick around at the end for that little bit of a secret tip that we've got just right at the very end. Boom, so that's our first rock. Dry brush with our first layer of grey. We're still going to go over that with a little bit of a lighter grey just to make the edges pop and stuff. But we're going to jump over to this one now. And again, this is one of those things you probably want to do in bulk because you can just see how quick you can get this sort of next layer on. And if you've got a bunch of them that you can do all at once, then you're laughing. Boom. Second rock done. Looking great. See, we still got all those dark sort of imprints from the first undercoat. Looks really good. We're just going to really quickly dry those. Beautiful. Alright, so now we're going to grab a little bit of white paint. Just don't even worry about cleaning your brush or your palette because we're going to use a little tiny bit of that grey that's left over. All about minimising waste and being as cost efficient as possible. You want to make sure you've got even more of the paint off this time. We're just brushing across those edges. And this is just highlighting a lot of that detail, bringing it all back out. Boom, just like that. You can see the difference of them next to each other. Doesn't look like a lot of difference while you're doing it, but when you look at your other rock that you've just done, you can see how huge of a difference it makes. And you can see I'm pretty savage with it. You don't have to be super neat with dry brushing. As long as you get that nice desired effect, you can be pretty rough. And being mindful that we don't overdo it, always checking back at your other rock. Beautiful. 2 rocks, done. Lovely. And now we're going to do one more with practically white. Super light one. You can see I'm really focusing on just getting a lot of the edges, because what that does is it just makes those little corner pieces just pop really nicely. Boom. And there we have it. 2 rocks. Ready to rock and roll. So we've actually had a request from one of our subscribers, SamPitcher2733. He's just asked about a little bit of flocking. So yeah, if you'd like to learn a little bit more about that, let's do it. All right, now thanks for staying this long into the video. This is the sort of secret part we're talking about right at the start. We're going to be doing a little bit of basic flocking. So I always like to keep a little bit of a tub of just PVA. I'll just top it up a little bit. I just buy the cheapest PVA that I can find on Lincraft or hardware store, wherever you're going. So just top that bad boy up. Okay, always also keep a very specific paintbrush just for doing this. Just your oldest, cheapest, nastiest one that you don't mind getting wrecked, because we're going to use using this one mainly for glue. So, got our PVA, got our project, we've got our brush. So today we're going to be using Battlefield Fieldgrass by the Army Painter collection. This stuff's awesome. One thing I also mentioned that you might need is a pair of tweezers. You can also just do this with your fingers though. Little pointy tweezers, like these ones, are really, really good for doing this sort of stage. Alright, so what you want to be doing, we're going to start with this one here, is we're going to grab a little bit of this PVA, and you don't want to just coat the whole thing, because then the whole thing will just be grass and you'll lose all this awesome detail. So you just want to focus in on some parts that you really want to have a bit of grass growing out of. So we're just going to pop a little bit. No too much rhyme or reason, just think about where grass would naturally sort of grow and sit. Sometimes it'll come out of the cracks, sometimes it's just sitting on the face. I like to have a point of origin where it comes up from the ground as well. This stuff doesn't dry too quickly, so we can do most of the entire sort of build of flocking all in one go with our PVA. Again, you don't want to cover the whole thing because then you'll lose all your detail. Sweet, so then you grab your flocking. Usually comes in a tub like this. You can get cheaper stuff, you can get more expensive stuff. It's endless. And what I like to do is just grab a little tuft. Make sure you're working on a clean surface, because anything that you will fall off your project we can put back into the tub. Again, mitigating wastage. And I'm just tapping this stuff on to the PVA where I've already put that little bit of coat of glue. You can see I'm just sort of dabbing it on there. I'm also kind of pushing it into the glue because I want it to really bind. Nice thick coat. I'm kind of letting go of a little bit while I'm dabbing. You can see I'm grabbing pretty big chunks. I'm not planning on using all of that, but it just makes it a bit easier. Some people like to just shake all of the stuff all over it. I just think it's a little bit too messy. This stage is always pretty messy, but I figure if you can mitigate mess as much as possible in a very messy hobby like this, then definitely do so. You can see that PVA still hasn't set fully, so you've got heaps of time to get this on here. You want to be as efficient as possible, but also take your time. And then give it a bit of a tap. You can see all that excess flocking coming off of it. And you notice that I'm doing this before I actually seal it with my varnish. But look how effective that looks now. So there you have it, flocked and unflocked. You want to collect up all of this stuff, because flocking also isn't cheap, unfortunately. Like a lot of things in most hobbies, all the good stuff is usually expensive. So you want to get all of it into a ball, put it back in your tub. Honestly, I've done, I reckon countless projects for this just single tub, and you can see it's still half full. So as long as you're being smart about how your hobby, you shouldn't be going through this kind of stuff too quickly. I thought I'd go through this real fast, but turns out if you're being smart, you're not going through it too quick. And there you have it. We've got one rock, just nice and easy, no flocking, good for caves and things like that. And then we've got one with a little bit of flocking. That's probably better to have out on a battlefield or something like that. I always like to have a little bit of a mixture of both flocked rocks and also unflocked rocks, because you'll find if you're doing something in like a snowy region and then you've got grass growing all over it, it just looks a little bit funny. So yeah, I always recommend just doing a little bit of both. And now we're just gonna go outside, give it a quick varnish, and we'll be ready to rock and roll. We'll call it a game. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That's how you make some really nice basic rocks. Don't forget to put your screws in the bottom of those ones just to give a little bit of weight on the table. Feels great. Go a little bit unflocked. And now that you know how, go with the flock as well. Because why the flock not? Alright, now I'd just like to thank everybody for coming to my channel. I know there's lots and lots of videos out there, so thank you so much for clicking on this one. If you could like and subscribe, click the little notification bell, that would be hugely helpful for me. Make sure you jump onto Facebook and like that one. If you've got any projects of your own that you'd like to upload onto my Facebook, I'd love to see what you're working on as well. So yeah, don't be a stranger. My name's Tommy, and it's been a pleasure. Thanks, bye. Game table, and start again. Video, there's a lot of videos. Go again. We're out at the start of it. My name's Tommy, and